The dragon Thornwick had been sleeping in his mountain cave for 300 years. His massive body was curled around piles of gold and jewels, his breathing slow and deep like the rumble of distant thunder. Nothing had disturbed his rest in all that time. The world outside had changed, kingdoms had risen and fallen, but inside the cave, everything remained perfectly still. Until the crying started. At first, Thornwick thought it was just the wind howling through the mountain passes. Winter storms often made strange sounds as they whipped around the peaks. But this sound was different. It was weak and broken, rising and falling in a rhythm that no wind could make. The dragon's golden eyes slowly opened, glowing in the darkness like twin lanterns. The crying continued. High-pitched and desperate. With a grunt of annoyance, Thornwick uncoiled his massive body. His scales scraped against stone as he moved, each one the size of a dinner plate and harder than steel. He hadn't planned on waking up for another century at least. Whatever was making that noise had better be worth his time. He followed the sound through the twisting passages of his lair. The deeper tunnels gave way to the outer chambers, and finally to the cave entrance where cold wind rushed in from outside. Snow had blown across the stone floor, creating small white drifts in the corners. There, just inside the entrance, was a human baby. Thornwick stopped and stared. The infant was wrapped in cloth that had once been white but was now gray and dirty. The wrapping was thin, completely inadequate for the freezing temperatures outside. The baby's face was red from crying, tiny fists waving in the air. It couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. The dragon looked past the baby toward the snowy landscape beyond his cave. There were footprints leading away down the mountain, already half filled with fresh snow. Someone had climbed all the way up here, left this child, and walked away. Left it here to die. Thornwick knew about humans and their strange customs. He'd lived long enough to see many odd things. But this surprised even him. Most creatures protected their young fiercely. Yet here was this tiny, helpless thing, abandoned in the home of a dragon. Whoever left it must have been truly desperate, or truly cruel. The smart thing would be to ignore it. The child would stop crying soon enough when the cold took it. Then Thornwick could return to his sleep. Dragons didn't involve themselves in human affairs. That had always been his philosophy. But the baby kept crying. Thornwick moved closer, his huge head lowering to examine the infant. Up close, he could see that the baby was a boy with gray eyes that seemed unusually alert. Those eyes locked onto the dragon's face, and for a moment, the crying stopped. The child stared at him with what looked like curiosity rather than fear. Then the crying started again, even louder. Quiet, small thing, Thornwick rumbled in the common tongue. His voice was deep enough to make the ground vibrate. The baby, of course, didn't listen. Thornwick sighed, a sound like steam escaping from a kettle. He really should just leave it. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the challenge of keeping something so fragile alive. Maybe it was simple curiosity about why humans threw away their children. Or maybe, after 3 centuries of silence, he was simply lonely and didn't want to admit it. Very carefully, the dragon reached out with one enormous claw and hooked the edge of the blanket. He lifted the bundle gently, surprised at how light it was. The entire baby weighed less than a single gold coin from his hoard. How did humans survive at all when they started life so weak and helpless? He carried the child deeper into the cave, into the chambers where his body heat kept the air warm. The baby's crying softened a bit as the temperature rose. Thornwick set him down on a flat rock near the treasure chamber, then sat back and considered his next problem. The child needed food. Dragons didn't produce milk. They hatched from eggs already capable of eating meat. Human babies were different, he knew that much. They needed something specific, something he didn't have. Which meant he'd have to steal it. Thornwick hadn't left his cave in decades. Now he was about to venture out into the world because of a crying human infant. The irony wasn't lost on him. He looked down at the baby, who had finally stopped crying and was now making soft cooing sounds. "You're going to be trouble, aren't you, small one?" The baby smiled at him, a toothless grin. That night, for the first time in 50 years, villagers in the valley below saw a dragon silhouette cross the moon. They locked their doors and hid their children, never knowing that the ancient terror flying overhead was on an errand of mercy, carrying stolen bottles of goat's milk back to the most unlikely nursery in the world. 15 years had passed since that snowy night when Thornwick found the baby at his cave entrance. The child had survived against all odds, growing from a helpless infant into a lean, quick-footed young man. Thornwick had named him Ash, both for the gray color of his eyes and for the burned village the dragon had glimpsed in the valley below on that first night. Ash had never known any home except the cave. While other children his age lived in wooden houses and played in village squares, he had grown up surrounded by mountains of gold coins, ancient books written in languages most humans had forgotten, and the constant presence of a dragon who was older than some kingdoms. The cave had become Ash's entire world, and what a world it was. The main chamber alone was larger than most town halls, with a ceiling so high it disappeared into shadows. Crystals grew from the walls, catching the light from Thornwick's fire and throwing rainbow patterns across the stone. Underground rivers ran through some passages, their water so clear you could see fish swimming 20 feet down. And everywhere, scattered like fallen leaves, were the treasures of ages. But Thornwick wasn't like the dragons from human stories who just slept on their gold and ate anyone who came near. He was a teacher, and Ash was his student. Every morning, Ash would wake on his bed of furs and find Thornwick already awake, waiting. The dragon never seemed to need much sleep anymore. He said it was because he'd already slept for 3 centuries and had wasted enough time. The lesson started simple when Ash was young. Reading and writing came first. Thornwick had books from 20 different kingdoms, some so old their pages crumbled at the slightest touch. Ash learned to read the common tongue, then the old tongue, then the runic script of the northern tribes. By the time he was 10, he could read texts that would have baffled the most educated scholars in the land. Mathematics came next, taught through counting the hoard. How many gold coins in that pile? Thornwick would ask. How many rubies? If I traded 3 diamonds for 7 emeralds, would that be a fair exchange based on size and clarity? It was practical math, the kind you couldn't learn from books. History lessons were different from what human children learned. Thornwick had lived through most of the events in history books, and he had opinions about them. He told Ash about the rise of the Eastern Empire, but from the perspective of someone who had watched it happen from above. He explained how the Great War hadn't really been about honor and glory like the songs claimed, but about farmland and trade routes. Humans write history to make themselves feel good, Thornwick said one afternoon, his tail swishing back and forth. They forget the boring parts and add in heroes who never existed. I remember what really happened. The truth is usually less exciting but more useful. When Ash turned 12, the combat training began. This was what he'd been waiting for. Thornwick would take him to a large, empty chamber deep in the cave system, where the ceiling was high and the floor was smooth. You're human, Thornwick said on the first day. That means you're small, weak, and slow compared to most things that might want to kill you. But humans have advantages. You can think quickly, adapt, and most importantly, you can learn techniques that take advantage of your size. The dragon had pulled his punches, of course. One full-strength swipe from those claws would have split Ash in 2. But even a gentle tap from Thornwick could send Ash flying across the room. He learned to roll with impacts, to dodge instead of block, to watch for the tiny shifts in weight that telegraphed where an attack was coming from. Dragons are patient, Thornwick explained during a break, while Ash caught his breath. We can wait for hours for the perfect moment to strike. Humans can't do that. You need to be quick and decisive. Strike fast, strike hard, then get out. By the time Ash was 15, he could hold his own in their sparring matches for nearly 10 minutes before Thornwick pinned him. It didn't sound like much, but considering he was fighting a creature that could crush stone with its bare claws, 10 minutes was impressive. But the most important lessons weren't about fighting or reading. They were the quiet conversations they had in the evenings, when Thornwick's fire burned low and shadows danced on the cave walls. One night, Ash was staring at his reflection in one of the underground pools. He did this sometimes, studying his own face as if searching for answers written on his skin. Thornwick noticed and moved closer. What troubles you, small one? Ash didn't look away from the water. Why did they leave me? My parents, I mean. Was I sick? Cursed? Was there something wrong with me? Thornwick was silent for a long moment. Dragons didn't believe in comforting lies. I don't know, he finally said. But I can tell you what I smell in your blood. You're different from other humans. There's something in you that I can't quite identify. Perhaps they sensed it and feared what they didn't understand. Humans do that. They fear the unusual. Is that why there are so few dragons left? Ash asked, finally looking up at his mentor. The question hung in the air like smoke. Thornwick's eyes grew distant, looking at something far away or long ago. Yes, he said quietly. When I was young, the skies were full of dragons. Hundreds of us. We ruled from the mountains, and the other races respected our power. But we were too proud, too set in our ways. We didn't change when the world changed. The younger races, humans especially, they adapt. They learn. They build on what came before. We dragons, We hoard our knowledge until we die, and then it dies with us. Is that why you're teaching me? Ash asked. Thornwick's mouth curved in what might have been a smile. Perhaps. Or perhaps I'm just a lonely old dragon who got tired of talking to himself. They sat in comfortable silence after that, the ancient dragon and the abandoned boy who had somehow become family. Outside, the world continued turning, full of kingdoms and wars and changes. But here in the cave, time moved differently. Here, a dragon was teaching a human boy that family wasn't about blood or species. It was about choosing to care, even when it would be easier not to. Especially when it would be easier not to. Ash was 17 when he saw another human being for the first time since infancy. It happened on an ordinary morning that turned out to be anything but ordinary. He was practicing his sword forms in one of the outer chambers when he heard voices echoing through the cave system. Not Thornwick's deep rumble, but higher pitched. Multiple voices, speaking in rapid, excited tones. Human voices. Ash froze mid-swing. In all his years in the cave, no one had ever made it this far inside. Thornwick had enchantments and natural defenses that kept most creatures away. But these voices were getting closer, and they didn't sound afraid. He moved silently through the shadows, a skill Thornwick had drilled into him countless times. Stay low, control your breathing, let the darkness hide you. He reached a ledge overlooking the main treasure chamber just as the intruders entered. There were 5 of them. 2 men and 3 women, all wearing mismatched armor and carrying weapons that had seen heavy use. Adventurers, Ash realized, remembering descriptions from the books he'd read. People who explored dangerous places for treasure and glory. The tallest man, with a scar running down his left cheek, whistled low as he saw the horde. Would you look at that? The legends were true. There's enough gold here to buy a kingdom. Assuming we can get it out past the dragon, said one of the women, a red-haired fighter with 2 swords strapped to her back. Her name was Claire, Ash would later learn. Speaking of which, where is the beast? Probably sleeping deeper in, said another man, younger than the first, carrying a bow. Dragons sleep for years at a time. We might get lucky. Ash watched them spread out, examining the treasure with greedy eyes. His hand tightened on his sword hilt. This was his home they were invading. These were Thornwick's treasures they were planning to steal. But more than that, they'd called his father a beast. A monster to be avoided or killed. The ground began to tremble. Ash felt it before the adventurers did. He knew what was coming. Thornwick had sensed the intrusion. The dragon emerged from the deeper tunnels like a mountain coming to life. His scales scraped against stone with a sound like swords being sharpened. His eyes burned with golden fire, and smoke curled from his nostrils. He was magnificent and terrifying, every inch the monster from human nightmares. The adventurers scrambled back, weapons raised. The scarred man shouted orders, trying to organize a defense. Claire moved to flank while the archer knocked an arrow. They were preparing for battle, preparing to fight Thornwick. Preparing to kill him. Something hot and fierce exploded in Ash's chest. Before he could think about it, before he could question the wisdom of what he was doing, he leaped down from the ledge. He landed between the adventurers and Thornwick, his sword drawn, facing the humans. You will not harm him, Ash said, his voice carrying an echo that sounded almost draconic. Everyone froze. The adventurers stared at him like he'd appeared out of thin air. Which, from their perspective, he basically had. Kid, get out of the way, the scarred man said, lowering his sword slightly. That thing is dangerous. We're here to deal with it. That thing, Ash said, his voice colder than he'd ever heard it, is my father. The silence that followed was absolute. The adventurers exchanged confused glances. Claire shook her head slightly, as if trying to clear it. Your father? Kid, that's a dragon. Are you under some kind of spell? I'm under no spell, Ash replied. Thornwick found me as a baby, abandoned at the entrance to this cave. He raised me, taught me, kept me alive when my own kind left me to die in the snow. So yes, he's my father. And you're not going to hurt him. The younger man with the bow laughed, but it was an uncomfortable sound. This is insane. You can't be serious. Dragons don't raise human children. They eat them. Do I look eaten to you? Ash shot back. Thornwick rumbled behind him, and Ash felt the familiar warmth of his father's presence. The dragon spoke, his voice filling the chamber. The boy speaks truth. I found him 17 years ago. I chose to let him live. Now he is mine, and I am his. One of the other women, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. She was older than the others, with gray streaking through her dark hair. There was something calculating in her eyes. This is fascinating. I've never heard of anything like this. A dragon raising a human child. You must have learned so much. I've learned enough to know that you should leave, Ash said firmly. Take nothing, harm nothing, and go back down the mountain. Tell whoever sent you that this dragon is not to be disturbed. The scarred man shook his head. Can't do that, son. There's a bounty on this dragon's head. The king himself wants proof it's dead. We came here to collect that bounty, and we're not leaving empty-handed. Then you'll die here, Ash said simply. The adventurers looked at each other uncertainly. They'd come expecting to fight a dragon, which was dangerous enough. They hadn't expected to deal with a human who fought alongside one. The dynamic had shifted, and they knew it. Claire finally spoke up. Look, kid. I get it. You think you owe this creature something. But it's a dragon. It's not capable of love or family. It probably kept you alive out of curiosity, nothing more. Come with us. We'll take you back to civilization. You can have a real life. Ash felt Thornwick tense behind him, but the dragon said nothing. This was Ash's choice to make. And suddenly, standing there between his father and these strangers of his own species, Ash realized something important. He was curious about them. Intensely curious. He'd read about humans in books, seen their cities from a distance when Thornwick flew him around the mountains. But he'd never talked to them, never walked among them, never experienced what it meant to be human among humans. Part of him, a part he'd been trying to ignore, desperately wanted to know what he'd been missing. The fight drained out of him. He lowered his sword slightly. I'll make you a deal, he said. Leave now, peacefully, and I'll come with you. Not permanently, but long enough to see your world. In exchange, you spread the word that Thornwick is under protection. No more bounty hunters, no more treasure seekers. Ash, Thornwick said softly, and there was something in his voice Ash had never heard before. Sadness, maybe. Or acceptance. Ash turned to face his father, and their eyes met. In that moment, 1,000 conversations happened without words. Thornwick had known this day would come. Dragons could live in isolation for centuries, content with their own company. Humans couldn't. Humans needed their own kind. Go, Thornwick finally said. See what you are. Learn what they are. But know this, small one. You carry both human heart and dragon wisdom. You are something neither of us has seen before. Something new. The dragon reached into the hoard and pulled out a small leather bag. Inside were gold coins, a few enchanted items, and a scale from Thornwick's own body. Take these. They will keep you safe and remind you that you always have a home here. Ash took the bag, his throat tight. He wanted to say so many things, but the words wouldn't come. Finally, he just nodded. He turned back to the adventurers. Let's go. But if any of you try to hurt him after I leave, I will find you. They believed him. The human world was louder than Ash had ever imagined. The adventuring party brought him to a town called Riverside, 3 days' journey from Thornwick's mountain. Those 3 days had been overwhelming. Ash had never walked on a dirt road before, never slept under the stars in the open, never sat around a campfire with other people. Everything was new and strange and slightly terrifying. The town itself was chaos to his senses. There were so many people, all moving and talking at once. Children ran through the streets chasing each other. Merchants shouted about their wares from wooden stalls. Somewhere nearby, a blacksmith's hammer rang against an anvil in a steady rhythm. The smells were intense too, a mix of cooking food, animals, unwashed bodies, and something sweet he couldn't identify. Ash stood frozen at the town gates, suddenly aware of how different he was. His clothes were made from furs and leather he'd crafted himself. His hair was longer than any of the men around him. He moved differently, carried himself differently. Even his eyes seemed wrong, too sharp and alert, watching everything like a predator. First time in a town? Claire asked, noticing his hesitation. She'd become something like a guide over the past few days, explaining human customs when the others got impatient with his questions. First time around more than 5 people, Ash admitted. Claire laughed, but not unkindly. Well, you're about to get an education. Come on, we're heading to the tavern first. The Iron Mug. Best place to hear news and find work. The tavern was dim and crowded. Long wooden tables filled most of the space, with people sitting elbow to elbow eating and drinking. The noise was incredible, dozens of conversations happening at once, all blending together into a wall of sound that made Ash's head hurt. The adventuring party found a table in the corner and ordered food. When the barmaid brought it, Ash stared at his plate in confusion. He recognized the bread and cheese, but the meat was covered in some kind of sauce, and there were vegetables he'd never seen before. "What's wrong?" asked the younger archer. His name was Ben, and he'd been suspicious of Ash from the start. "Nothing," Ash said, picking up his fork awkwardly. He'd eaten with his hands his whole life. Utensils felt strange and unnecessary. Over the following weeks, Ash learned what it meant to be human among humans. The adventuring party, it turned out, was always looking for work. They took contracts from merchants who needed guards, hunted dangerous creatures for local nobles, and explored old ruins looking for treasure. They invited Ash to join them, partly out of curiosity and partly because they'd seen him fight during an encounter with bandits on the road. His first real job was guarding a caravan heading north. It seemed simple enough, but Ash quickly realized how different he was from normal fighters. When bandits attacked, the other guards shouted warnings and formed defensive positions. Ash simply moved, flowing through the fight with a grace that shouldn't have been possible. He disarmed 3 attackers before most people had drawn their weapons. After the fight, one of the other caravan guards approached him. His name was Tyler, a veteran soldier with gray in his beard. "Where'd you learn to fight like that, kid?" "I've been doing this for 20 years and I've never seen movements that smooth." "My father taught me," Ash said, which was true enough. "Your father must be one hell of a swordsman." "He's not a swordsman," Ash replied. "He's a dragon." Tyler laughed, thinking it was a joke. Ash let him think that. But it wasn't all strange and uncomfortable. Ash discovered things about humanity that surprised him. There was a healer in their group, a quiet woman named Beth who used herbs and bandages to treat injuries. She taught Ash about medicine, showing him plants that could reduce fever or stop infection. Thornwick had taught him about survival, but this was different. This was humans helping each other, sharing knowledge freely instead of hoarding it. He learned about friendship too. Real friendship, not just the bond between a dragon and the child he'd raised. Tyler began teaching him card games in the evenings. Claire showed him how to haggle with merchants. Even Ben, who'd been suspicious at first, warmed up after Ash saved his life during a fight with a wild bear. But Ash also learned about human weaknesses. He saw how quickly people could turn on each other over money or pride. He watched 2 men nearly kill each other in a tavern over an insult that seemed meaningless. He saw poverty in the streets, children begging for food while wealthy merchants walked past without a second glance. "Why don't you help them?" he asked Claire one day, gesturing to a group of hungry kids. She shrugged uncomfortably. "We barely have enough for ourselves. That's just how the world works." "It doesn't have to be," Ash said, and gave the children all the copper coins in his pocket. The biggest surprise came 3 months after leaving the mountain. The adventuring party had taken a contract to investigate strange magical disturbances near an old battlefield. When they arrived, Ash felt something awaken inside him. The air crackled with energy, and suddenly his hands were glowing with a soft blue light. "He's a sorcerer!" Ben shouted, jumping back. Ash stared at his hands in shock. Magic. He had magic. Thornwick had never mentioned this possibility, but then again, the dragon probably wouldn't have known. This was something human, something in Ash's blood that had been sleeping all these years. Beth helped him understand it. Some people are born with magic in their blood. It usually shows up when they are young, but sometimes trauma or unusual circumstances can delay it. Living with a dragon for 17 years, breathing in that magical energy every day, that definitely counts as unusual circumstances. Over the next weeks, Ash learned to control his newfound abilities. Spells that took other sorcerers years to master came naturally to him. The discipline Thornwick had taught him, the patience and precision, made him a faster learner than anyone expected. He could create fire with a thought, shield himself from attacks, even sense magical energy from a distance. But with every new skill he learned, with every friendship he made, Ash felt a growing tension inside him. He was becoming part of this world, understanding humans in a way he never could have from books. He saw their courage and creativity, their ability to work together and build amazing things. A dragon alone was powerful, but humans together could reshape the world. Yet he also saw their cruelty and short-sightedness. He watched them destroy forests for farmland without thinking about the future. He saw them fear and attack things they didn't understand, just like Thornwick had said. And he couldn't help but compare it to the dragon way, patient and careful, thinking in centuries instead of years. Then came the news that changed everything. The party was in a city tavern when someone mentioned it casually. The king had increased the bounty on Thornwick. Dragon hunters from 3 kingdoms were gathering, planning a coordinated assault. They'd hired wizards and siege weapons. This time, they weren't taking chances. Ash's blood ran cold. He looked around the table at his companions, people he'd come to consider friends. They were exchanging glances, and he could see the calculation in their eyes. That bounty was enough to retire on. Enough to live comfortable lives forever. Claire met his gaze and looked away quickly, shame coloring her cheeks. "We know the way to the cave," Ben said quietly. "We could guide them. Split the bounty 5 ways, it's still a fortune." "He's just a dragon," the scarred leader said, but he wouldn't look at Ash either. "It's not personal. It's just business." Ash stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. The noise in the tavern seemed to fade away. He looked at each of them in turn, these people he'd traveled with, fought beside, learned from. People he'd started to think of as something close to family. "I'll guide you," he said finally, his voice flat and cold. "I know the cave better than anyone. I'll take you right to him." They looked surprised, then pleased. They didn't see the lie in his eyes. They didn't notice how his hand had moved to the dragon scale hanging around his neck, warm against his chest. They didn't realize that Ash had just made a choice, and it wasn't the one they expected. The journey back to the mountain took 4 days. Ash led the way, saying little, while his former companions talked excitedly about what they'd do with their share of the bounty. Claire wanted to buy a farm. Ben talked about opening a shop in the capital. Tyler planned to retire and spend his days fishing. They made plans for a future built on betraying the creature who'd raised him. Ash said nothing. He just kept walking, feeling the weight of the dragon scale against his chest and the magic building inside him with each step closer to home. On the 4th evening, they camped at the base of Thornwick's mountain. The same mountain where Ash had spent his entire life until 6 months ago. In the darkness, it looked different somehow. More imposing. More like the dangerous place from human stories than the home he remembered. "We'll go in at dawn," the scarred leader said, sharpening his sword. "Ash, you'll lead us straight to the main chamber. No tricks, no warnings. You do that, and we'll cut you in for a share. You don't, and we'll leave you here tied to a tree." Ash nodded, staring into the campfire. The flames reminded him of Thornwick's eyes, warm and golden. He wondered if his father knew he was coming. Dragons had ways of sensing things, especially on their own territory. That night, when the others were asleep, Claire sat down next to him. She'd been quieter than usual during the journey, her usual jokes and stories absent. "You don't have to do this, you know," she said softly. "You could just leave. Head east, start over somewhere new. No one would blame you." "Wouldn't they?" Ash asked, not looking at her. "I would understand," she said. "Look, I know you care about that dragon. But Ash, it's not natural. Dragons and humans aren't meant to be family. You deserve a real life with your own kind." "My own kind left me to die in the snow," Ash reminded her. "Thornwick gave me life. He gave me everything. And now you want me to lead you to him so you can take his head for gold." Claire was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry," she finally said. "I really am. But this is how the world works. It's survival. We need that money." "At what cost?" Ash asked, finally turning to look at her. "What does it cost your soul to murder someone who never hurt you? To betray someone who showed you mercy?" She didn't have an answer for that. She just stood and walked back to her bedroll, leaving Ash alone with the fire in his thoughts. Dawn came too quickly. They gathered their weapons and began the climb. Ash led them through passages he'd known since childhood, past crystal formations that caught the morning light, along underground streams where he used to practice his sword work. Every step felt like a betrayal, even though he knew what he was going to do. They reached the main chamber, the heart of Thornwick's lair. The treasure glittered in the dim light, exactly as Ash remembered it. And there, in the center of it all, lay Thornwick. His eyes were open, watching them enter. He'd been waiting. "Spread out," the leader ordered. "Surround it. Don't give it room to maneuver." The adventurers began to move into position. Ben knocked an arrow. Tyler readied his shield. Claire drew her twin swords, though her hands shook slightly. Ash walked forward until he stood between them and Thornwick. Then he turned to face his former companions, and as he did, blue light began to glow around his hands. Magic, responding to his will, fed by months of practice and years of dragon-taught discipline. "I can't let you do this," he said quietly. The leader's face darkened. "Boy, you made a deal. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." "I made no deal," Ash replied. "I just let you think I did." Then he attacked. The fight was brutal and quick. Ash had learned from the best fighters humanity had to offer over the past months, but he'd been trained since childhood by something far more dangerous. His magic lashed out, not to kill but to incapacitate. He sent Ben flying into a wall with a blast of force. Tyler's sword became too hot to hold and he dropped it with a cry. The leader rushed forward and Ash simply sidestepped, using the man's own momentum to send him crashing into a pile of gold coins. Claire was the only one who managed to land a blow, her sword cutting across Ash's arm. He gritted his teeth against the pain and disarmed her with a spell, then swept her legs out from under her. Within 2 minutes, all 5 adventurers lay on the ground, conscious but unable to rise. Ash stood over them, breathing hard, blood dripping from his wounded arm. His former friends stared up at him with a mixture of fear, anger, and something that might have been respect. "I won't kill you," Ash said, his voice shaking. "But I can't let you hurt him either. You're not evil people. You're just human, doing what humans do. But this ends here." Thornwick rose from his resting place and moved closer. The dragon's massive head lowered until he was eye level with Ash. "You chose," he said simply. "I couldn't choose anything else," Ash replied, and suddenly tears were streaming down his face. "They're my kind, but you're my family. How am I supposed to choose between worlds? Between what I am and who raised me?" The dragon was silent for a moment, then spoke in a voice that seemed to echo through the entire cave. "Perhaps you don't have to choose. Perhaps there is another way." Over the next hours, while the adventurers recovered, Thornwick explained his idea. The Age of Dragons was ending, that much was certain. Within a century, maybe 2, the last dragon would die. All their knowledge, all their wisdom accumulated over thousands of years, would die with them. But what if it didn't have to? "There are other dragons," Thornwick said. "Scattered across the world, isolated and waiting to die. And there are other humans like you, Ash. Abandoned children, orphans, people caught between worlds with no place to belong. What if we brought them together?" Ash understood immediately. "You want dragons to teach humans. To pass on what you know before it's lost." "Not just teach," Thornwick corrected. "To share. Humans have things to teach us as well. You've shown me that. Your adaptability, your creativity, your ability to work together. These are strengths we dragons never developed. Perhaps, in our final years, we can create something new. Something that combines the best of both our kinds." It took time to make it work. Ash had to negotiate with kingdoms, convincing suspicious rulers that dragons could be allies instead of threats. He had to find other dragons, hermits who'd withdrawn from the world, and convince them that teaching was better than dying alone. He had to locate abandoned children and offer them something his own parents never gave him, a choice. Some dragons refused. They were too proud, too set in their ancient ways. They chose to die as they'd lived, alone with their hordes. Ash mourned each one, but he understood. Change was hard, especially for beings who'd lived for millennia. But others agreed. An ancient dragon named Silverscale took in twin girls abandoned by a village that feared their magical gifts. A dragon called Ember taught a blind boy to sense the world through magic instead of sight. A dragon named Stormwing partnered with a human scholar, combining ancient knowledge with new ideas to create texts that would teach generations to come. The first school opened 5 years after Ash's confrontation in Thornwick's cave. It was built into a mountain, with chambers for both dragon and human teachers. Orphans came from across the kingdoms, children who'd been abandoned or rejected or simply didn't fit into normal society. They learned reading and writing, combat and magic, history and philosophy. But more than that, they learned that family wasn't about blood or species. It was about choosing to care, about passing on what you knew, about building bridges instead of walls. Claire came to the school's opening. She'd given up adventuring and now ran a network that found abandoned children and brought them to safety. "I was wrong," she told Ash that day. "About you, about Thornwick, about what's natural. This is important. What you're building here, it's more valuable than any treasure hoard." Ash stood at the school gates on opening day, watching young students meet their dragon mentors for the first time. Some were scared. Some were excited. All of them were getting a second chance, just like he had. Thornwick landed beside him, his scales gleaming in the afternoon sun. The dragon was older now, moving a bit slower, sleeping a bit more. But his eyes were still sharp, still warm. "You gave me purpose in my final century," Thornwick said quietly. "I expected to sleep away my remaining years. Instead, I got to watch you grow. I got to see something new born into the world." "The Age of Dragons is ending," Ash said, echoing words from years ago. "Yes," Thornwick agreed. "But the Age of Synthesis has begun. Something neither dragon nor human alone could have created. That's your legacy, small one. Not gold or glory, but bridges between worlds. Ash watched a young girl, no older than he'd been when Thornwick found him, reach out tentatively to touch a dragon's scales for the first time. The dragon, patient and gentle, lowered her head to make it easier. In that moment, Ash saw the future. Not one where dragons faded into legend and myth, but one where their wisdom lived on, combined with human ingenuity and heart. The age of dragons was ending. The age of synthesis had begun. And Ash, the abandoned baby who'd been raised by an ancient dragon, stood at the center of it all, a bridge between what was and what could be. He was home.